tags?
In your honor.
Okay.
I always do when there's either when I leave home
Yeah.
or when I'm on camera with anybody.
Okay. Okay. Did you have any family or anything with October 7th?
No, I'm always once or twice removed.
Yeah. It's crazy. I mean, I think you would know better than I would, but I always remember growing up and living outside of Israel, they would always say that any terrorist attack, there was always someone that knew someone, or like some family that was.
Small country.
Yeah.
Small country.
But it does feel though that the country has gotten a little bit bigger since then. Doesn't feel so
It
small.
has, and very early on, in the first week, 10 days, my son asked me, where is it going in terms of the environment we live in?
Yeah.
And I told him within 3 months, we're going to be in a schizophrenic reality where in the main population centers, there will be a bubble of normalcy while war is raging north and south. And that was just the experience from the war of attrition in those old days.
So, I mean, just refresh my memory because, so I'll admit something to you. I can actually admit it to you now that I'm out of the system and I'm not a journalist anymore, so I can speak freely. But I don't normally get starstruck, but for some reason, and I've been on a plane with the prime minister. I've met CEOs and whatever, and I saw a normal human being, flesh and blood, in front of me. But for some reason, when I met you that first time in that cafe, and I think it was North Tel Aviv, right? Or I guess probably close to where you live. For some reason, I felt like I was having like this close contact with history, and I was. No, no.
That's humbling. Wow.
No, but in the sense that for me, and I don't know why, but or maybe it's obvious, but this, you being close to the Oslo process and that being like this sort of mythical period in my mind where there was this brief window of a few years, let's say, where peace was possible, and what people must have been thinking. What people must have been thinking at that point. So, and just as someone that was close to that process and living in that time, for me, it was like this, oh my God, please tell me more, oh master. But, but tell me, I mean, you've been through a lot living in this country. How does this feel? How does this one feel compared to all the other times?
I'd say, there's a lot of talk about the fact that the country is in a post-trauma PTSD, post-trauma syndrome disorder, or the opposite, post-trauma disorder syndrome.
Post-traumatic stress disorder, yeah.
Okay, that's the one.
Yeah.
I don't think we're there. I think we're still in the trauma phase, because whereas people went back to normal life with the exception of the 200,000 displaced in the north and the south, everybody else went back to life in terms of job routine, school routine, kindergarten routine, supermarket routine, whatever. But the intensity of the stories of that day, the daily, hourly reminders about the hostages, the heroes of that day, the abandonment, the sensation of abandonment by the military and the government, they are all around us. I don't want to say 24/7, because the media gradually is inching its way to normal programming. But only inching its way. We're still in a prolonged all day media focus, every channel on what happened
Yeah.
and the fallout. And the intensity of it, I think, keeps the trauma very vivid, as opposed to reflections and so on.
Do you think, though, like, for example, any traumatic thing that I've had occur to me personally, there's phases, right? There's the event happens, and then I just continuously replay it in my mind. And how did I go wrong? What could I have done differently? Oh my God, is this thing going to be like, for example, one time, just the thing that comes to my mind is I had my son on my shoulders, and he was 2 years old, and I was grabbing with one hand, and I let him go, and he flipped, and he landed on his head on a rock, and he had this. He's fine, right? But I remember thinking, oh my God, this poor 2-year-old boy, and just having that guilt of I'm there to protect him, and I didn't, so you magnify that times a million, right? And that's what October 7th was. Do you feel that people are still there? I mean, like, what do you experience? What are you experiencing? Like, how do you?
We have to distinguish between the personal, immediate environment and this schizophrenia that I find myself in, where the effect, the emotional effect, is still there, and you have to cut away to the analytical obligation of what I'm engaged in.
Okay.
So the personal, it is there all the time. I can tell you that even though I live in a town that only had several occasions of red alert, missile alert, only few, nonetheless, we heard a lot of the interceptions, the booms of the interception of the incoming missiles with the Iron Dome.
Yeah.
We heard it from all over central Israel. We heard it here, but only a couple times, 5, 6 times, we had to go into the safe room. Still, a substantial noise in the neighborhood get me jumping for a brief second.
Yeah.
My children and grandchildren, never mind the grandchildren, most of them are too young, but my children and their spouses keep asking me every time that there's tension in the north, is it coming? Because they know that if we have war with Hezbollah, what we experienced in the last 120 some days is going to be relatively insignificant in terms of what's going on, what will transpire in the center of Israel.
Yeah.
And the questions are almost every other day. Should we do something? Should we prepare ourselves? And of course, the more you visit, which I do, the headquarters of the families of the hostages, the more it is alive on a daily basis.
How what keeps you going there? I mean,
initially I was volunteered to a team that was supporting the headquarters of the families.
Okay.
Have you been there to the headquarters?
Honestly, it's too much for me. The hostage situation. So it's too heartbreaking.
Again, when you distinguish the emotional from the analytical, the emotional is just as you say, it's too much. But when you go to the analytical, it is a microcosmos of how civil society took over the country in the absence of a government. The speed with which the headquarters was created, the sophistication of how they address the various aspects of the campaign. International media, international dignitaries, local media, Um, just somebody donated a huge space,
Wow.
divided into sectors, and it's been going on, as you know, for months
Wow.
as a contribution. And the number of volunteers, I mean, just the one that I interact with most is the one that is a 24/7 unit of retired diplomats who man that thing
Wow.
in order to do primarily three things. One is host foreign dignitaries and give them the spiel of what it's all about and
Okay.
introduce them to members of families who give their story. The other thing they do is they advise the families on how to address specific audiences, and they do it in all languages. I mean, retired diplomats from India to South America, you name it. You have all the languages represented. And then they are also involved in strategizing. Where should the families go? Who should they focus upon? Who should go where? How to prep them for those trips? They're doing it, and that's just one unit within this complex. And I was volunteered for a subunit that was supposed to come up with ideas outside the box in terms of mobilizing international support for the hostages.
What do
I wouldn't tell you that we produced miracles.
Yeah.
We did not. But we think that we came up with a few ideas that have been at play.
I mean, where do you even begin? Because it's, it's so closely linked with the war itself and the aims. I mean, I'm not the first person to notice this. Obviously, this has been discussed publicly, but it is in conflict with the other stated aim, which is the destruction of Hamas. And with Hamas hiding these hostages, which I still don't understand how they haven't been found. Maybe you can help me understand that. But what do you think? I mean, is it possible to do both at the same time, to destroy Hamas and to get the hostages? Is it?
No, from the outset, some of us, it's not a consensus, as you know, but some of us felt that there's an inherent conflict between the two objectives. And that conflict was amplified repeatedly by the Prime Minister in various statements. I mean, look, the basic difference between this round and previous ones was that on previous occasions, no matter how much damage we sought to inflict on Hamas in order to degrade its capabilities and deter it from coming back and starting yet another round, no matter how much damage we did, everybody knew that in the end of the day, we're in for ceasefire understandings with Hamas. Hamas will continue to run Gaza, and we have, for 15 years or more, it's the Netanyahu strategy, policy directives to the security establishment that we do not remove Hamas from Gaza. He had his reasons, awful reasons. It all exploded in our faces on October 7th. But that was the strategy. So it's one thing when the leader of Hamas and the leadership of Hamas know that there is a morning after for them. And then you can strike a deal. But when you keep telling them, you are done with, your only way out is either surrender or we'll kill you. There is no third option.
Right.
So when they use the hostages as the ultimate human shield, there's no incentive for releasing them. So they would release some if you offer them a relief, a pause. But they will always keep what they consider are the most potent shield until whatever last minute there is. But when the prime minister goes on camera to the public and say, we will continue and we will kill them no matter what, after they release the hostages, we will kill them, where is the incentive for them to strike a deal?
Wow, it
was at the root of something that we did in Commanders for Israel Security. And if you want, I'll explain what organization it is.
Yeah, do it. Please do.
But what we did very early on, we sent to the War Cabinet a memo, and we did the same with Washington and some relevant neighbors in the region. We sent a memo that I can summarize by, I think, 3 words. No, more. 4 words. All for all and out. Now, what does it mean? We developed it's a 1-pager in which we said that for the reasons that I just enumerated at length, but we didn't need to spell it out so much detail because Eisenkot and Gantz and Bibi and the others don't need, they know what we're talking about, even shorthand. Anyway, what we said was that the only way out is what we called the Lebanon model, the Beirut model. That is to say, in 1982, after Israel invaded Lebanon because of, at that time, the PLO, Arafat and his entire leadership was allowed to leave for Tunisia. Okay. What we said, when we said all for all and out, we meant all hostages, for all prisoners, and all of them, with the leadership of Hamas, out. There was already discussions in the Arab world where out might be, and most were pointing at Algeria as the one that is willing to accept them. But we didn't presume to replace the government in negotiating the where, okay, or the how.
Why Algeria? Just curious.
Algeria apparently felt, why Tunisia in 82? The leadership there decided that was a good way to show, on the one hand, sympathy with the Palestinians, I'm doing something for them. And on the other hand, show the international community we're useful, we're instrumental. Give us some credit for doing that. So all kind of internal considerations of the Algerians, which I'm not privy to. Right. But we got the indication that if that were to be implemented, it's the likely destination. Some people suggested Turkey because of its close Erdogan close support for Hamas. And then there were other ideas too, but that's a secondary issue. First of all, does the Israeli government agree that you accomplish the 2 primary objectives that you set out, which is bringing all the hostages back home alive and getting rid of Hamas in Gaza? Both of them are implemented by this one, even though it's quite politically challenging to release 6,000 security prisoners from our prisons. So it takes leadership, which we currently don't have. Anyway, that was the logic. It's the one way we saw that you can square the 2 objectives.
So, and how does that? How do you think that day 2 would have looked like? Let's say the government had followed your Commanders for the Security of Israel, their advice, this memo. what exactly does that solve for? Because you still have, correct me if I'm wrong, right? But when the PLO was kicked out of Lebanon, they were still recognized as the leaders of the Palestinian national movement. And of course, Arafat made his way back into Palestine, and the history continues from there.
Oslo.
Right, exactly. And so you're saying that that Hamas can be?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
No. On the one hand, look, today, after October 7th, it's very difficult to talk about the possibility that Hamas will change course as a movement. You can't talk about it because emotions are so high. I, for one, never accepted in the 80s that there's no way that the PLO will change from a terrorist organization to a political movement. And even though it's very difficult to say today, I'm not sure that 10 years from now, Hamas or whatever new name will be the gathering entity of Palestinian Islamists will not have changed course from primarily terrorist military organization to a primarily political one. One whose agenda are an anathema to me, but a legitimate player as long as it does not resort to violence.
Mm-hmm.
Legitimate player of the Palestinian political arena. If we are smart, we will help the moderates so that the Islamists will never win elections. But thus far, we have done the opposite. We empowered the radicals and undermined the moderates on the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority. So changing Hamas is not the objective of the specific move that we were advocating, and it was not even an assumed outcome.
Mm-hmm.
The assumed outcome was to find a way to end the fighting in Gaza before both sides have more casualties,
Mm-hmm.
but accomplish the objective that there is no more Hamas, and the morning after begins. Now, there's a big question of what does the morning after look like? And we've been working on it, and we have our own ideas. And some of them already trickled into what one might call the Biden initiative, which is reflective of not just the US policy, but the policy of the American relevant partners in the region. They're all united today around the same concept of what the morning after should look like. And it is the same as we developed here inside.
So you are someone that, you know all the relevant players from up close, right? You have your relations with the Palestinian Authority, you have your relationships in Washington, of course, obviously in Israel. So from an
Jordan, Saudi Arabia,
the
Emirates, Qatar, Europe.
Yeah, exactly. So,
and when you say you, it's plural.
Sure. But from an outsider's point of view, I think I have decreasing levels of confidence that any Palestinian leadership, whether moderate or extreme or not, is an effective conduit for real progress. Because so Hamas, obviously, we disqualify on its face, but even the Palestinian Authority, and now I'm just thinking as a Palestinian, right? And I see the levels of corruption that they have over there and their ineffectiveness. And again, putting aside the fact that now Hamas is more popular than it's ever been, or it's been in a while. What is to be gained by? Why should I trust these guys if they're corrupt? Seemingly, right? All the polls show, and there's plenty of evidence to support that. If they're corrupt and ineffective, what makes you think otherwise? Like, well, why do you why do you support, for example, and you made mention to Biden and their sort of their push towards empowering, let's say, the Palestinian Authority to drive some kind of progress towards a two-state solution?
There's a lot to unpack in this one question.
The floor is yours, man.
Yeah. So I try to zoom in on two aspects of it.
Yeah.
One, I don't want to put words in your mouth, and you didn't say it, but others do. And that is that there is something about the Palestinians that they are different from any other people, and therefore cannot govern themselves properly. Sort of a genetic deformation. I reject that for a variety of reasons, not the least experience.
As do I. I would never say that.
So the very fact that today we have a very weak Palestinian Authority that enjoys no public support whatsoever, 80% or more want it gone. 80% or more want Abu Mazen gone.
Yeah.
That's not because of some basic flaw in the Palestinian psychic. That is a result of certain processes that brought the Palestinian Authority to its current miserable state. And those processes are both internal and external. Internally, as you said correctly, it became corrupt. It became detached from its own constituency. It became authoritarian, non-democratic, and even paranoid at the top, to the extent of exiling either from politics or from the West Bank altogether the best and the brightest, because Abu Mazen felt that they were challenging his authority.
Which is not the point, right? The point is the prosperity and the prosperity of Palestinian people. Right?
So the old Abu Mazen is very different from the younger one. Very different. I mean, the picture over my shoulder is too small for you to see, but that's Abu Mazen at dinner in my home. He was a very different man. We worked very closely, including in our team, very small team, and he and his small team manipulating Yasser Arafat into what we jointly believed was essential. He was a man of peace all his life. He was and still is hostile to violence. I remember the courage that he took, or at least that I viewed, when he, during the height of the Second Intifada, when for all Palestinians the blood was gushing and they didn't see straight, they saw through red, and the best of them were engaged in violence. Really, people who were the hardcore of the Palestinian peace camp at the time were engaged in violence, in brutal violence. And he went from one branch of Hamas to another, of Fatah to another, telling them, stop it, you are insane, you are distancing our future, you are killing the prospect. And it took a lot of courage at that time to stand up to violence. He was not alone, but they were very, very few, less than a handful at the top.
And you're right. Even that sort of resistance to violent confrontation with Israel continues even now, right?
Absolutely. And not just resistance to confrontation, but they are paying a very serious price with their own people when they cooperate with our security agencies.
True.
They cooperated with our security agencies before the Second Intifada, and once it was over, okay? They did. Now, I'm digressing from what you wanted me to focus, but nonetheless, the Palestinian security agencies were the pride and joy of the Palestinian people. They are all trained under the authority of an American general, and his agency is called USSC, United States Security Coordinator. There are Canadians and Brits and Australians in this thing, and it is funded by various countries, and they are responsible for training and equipping the Palestinian security agencies. But with time, they also became a liaison between them and our forces when things weren't bad and communication channels were interrupted. They were the pride and joy, and they were the best trained, I think, in the Arab world, in the sense that when a policeman in the Arab world issues you a ticket, you can buy your way out with a 50 shekel bill. Not in Palestine. The pride was such, and the training they instilled in them, the pride in the uniform, that it was not the case. And Palestinians looked at them as symbolizing a state in being. With time, when we changed course and gradually the hope for statehood evaporated, the same people who were the vehicle for statehood became the subcontractors of the occupation, doing the same thing, doing exactly the same job. One day they were such, and in a couple of years they were that. Whenever there is tension and they go into the street with a uniform, the crowd screams at them, "Traitors! You're serving the occupation, not Palestinian national aspirations." At moments of crisis, I heard it from the head of the agencies. They have 30% absenteeism from work.
Wow.
Because they don't want to put the uniform on and go into the street because of the peer pressure. And I asked him, how can you sleep at night if you don't know if in the morning they will show up to work? And he looked at me and he says, "You don't understand the half of it. It's not that I worry that they don't show up to work. I worry that they will show up with their weapons somewhere else and join a mob attacking Israelis in order to cleanse themselves of the accusation that they are traitors and subcontractors of the occupation."
Wow.
Mohammed Dahlan once told me when he was still in Gaza, running security in Gaza. He's now in exile in Abu Dhabi. Another picture on the wall. Mohammed Dahlan told me, "You don't understand. When I get instructions or requests from the IDF to go and arrest someone in the Khan Yunis refugee camp, my boys, his soldiers, are supposed to arrest a neighbor, a classmate, a friend." He says, "When I do it when there is a political horizon, they do it in the service of Palestinian national interest. When I do it with no political horizon, they do it in the service of the Israeli occupation." Most Israelis don't understand this. Now let me come back. And I said one problem was the deformation of the Palestinian Authority internally, and the need for new blood, for reforms, organizational reforms. I remember there was a period, if you want evidence that it is not a genetic deformation and Palestinians can run a healthy administration, it was the time that Salam Fayyad, who came to the West Bank from a senior position with the International Monetary Fund in Washington, was Minister of Finance and later Prime Minister.
He was
of
amazing.
The Palestinian Authority. Tremendous person. He's now at Princeton. But he is willing to come back.
Bring him back.
Should Abu Mazen allow it?
Oh,
because he is another one of those who might overshadow the old president.
uh-huh. But just
So,
spell out what exactly he did, because I mean I know a little bit about him, but
so I met with him in the American Colony Hotel in East Jerusalem.
yeah.
I needed to discuss with him something, and he told me, here is a link tomorrow. Click on it in your computer, and you will see the Palestinian budget fully transparent for everyone to observe. If you want the reason that he was fired, that's part of it, because he didn't tolerate corruption.
Yeah.
And he
But
wanted transparency, and that was still under Arafat. That was still under Yasser Arafat. Anyway, what I'm saying is that one thing that happened was the internal deformation. And when people say that there is a need for reform, and President Biden coined the phrase, you know, people don't talk about PA anymore, Palestinian Authority. People talk about RPA, Revitalized Palestinian Authority.
Okay.
And that's a coin by President Biden. Now, when you take the term revitalize and open this black box and say, what's in it? Everybody thinks about the need for new blood in leadership. Yeah, personal reforms are necessary. The elections eventually will have to happen. But institutional reforms are no less essential. The place is just a mess, and it's not functioning properly
Okay.
for the people. So that's one. But there's no way that the Palestinian Authority in its current situation will be strong enough to enact the necessary reforms unless those who can help it by strengthening it will do their jobs. And nobody is more important than Israel in that respect. We are not only by far the powerful party, we hold most of the cards. If we wish, we choke the Palestinian Authority, as our Minister of Finance, Smotrich, is doing these days. If we wish, we give it the space. If the Israeli security establishment coordinates with the Palestinian security agencies and allows them to do some of the job, rather than we present them to their own people as useless, if we constrain Israeli settler violence, I mean, a Palestinian individual today says the IDF is not protecting me from the settlers. The Palestinian agencies do not protect me from them. So where do I go? So he says the only place to go is Hamas. They'll give me weapons, and I'll be able to defend my family. And on order, I will kill an Israeli if necessary.
So
In order for me to trust, trust. I think trust is overrated. Okay, I will
why?
not trust the Palestinians. Why?
Yeah.
I'll give you two examples. I'll give you one. It's enough. There was no trust between Begin and Sadat. No trust between them, and we have peace for more than 40 years. So trust is overrated.
Okay.
It's interest. And it's an ability to ask yourself, and this is the question Menachem Begin asked everybody, if I accept to give up the entire Sinai for peace, which means I give a tangible thing 3 times the size of Israel in return for the intangible piece of paper. Okay? If worse comes to worse, and all hell breaks loose, and Egypt violates all its commitments, and moves troops and tanks and Air Force into the Sinai, can I reverse that at a reasonable cost? If the answer is yes, I go for it. Because if I don't go for it, I know there will be war. If I do go for it, perhaps there will not be.
Wow.
There's no such thing as a good decision and a clear cut and a safe passage.
Right.
There are risks with every decision and every non-decision.
Right.
So when it comes to the Palestinian issue, given the fact that between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River, there are 7 million Palestinians and 7 million Jews, what are our options?
Yeah.
Embrace them because we don't trust them? If you don't trust them, why embrace them? And become one and lose our identity and a Jewish majority in an ever conflicted reality because they don't have equal rights?
Right.
Or
Right.
should we find a way to securely separate?
So look, there's much that we agree upon, especially on the last thing that you said, that if you look at the map of options that we have available, I think the far right, I think they're delusional when they say, it's all ours and we'll just control everything and that'll just work out fine. That's a terrible idea. So you're right. I mean, the only way to do this is to have some kind of an amicable split, right? You guys run your own show, we run our own show, enough killing each other. And the question, of course, as it's been for many decades, is how to get there. And I mean,
one more thing, not just
yes.
how to get there,
Mm-hmm.
but the security arrangements are going to be key.
Correct. Absolutely. And there's a I actually want to go one layer deeper into what you've been saying. You said that the security forces, Dahlan was telling you, they have to arrest a classmate, a neighbor, a friend, a cousin, whatever it is. But even beneath those personal bonds, there's still the moral plane where they say you're doing something that is, evil in its own sake, or just bad for everyone, or both. And wrong is still wrong, right? And you need people, you need institutions. And this ties into the corruption thing, that you need institutions and people who are raised and held to a higher moral and ethical standard. And again, not saying that Israel is perfect. Obviously, it's got its own corruption issues, but it's not to compare to what's going on with the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, of course, as well. Hamas even way worse, right? If you just look at the despair that we see in Gaza. That you need to have that kind of a cultural shift where you place more of an emphasis on morals and ethics, and this is not a Palestinians are genetically sort of inferior to everyone else. That's not it at all, right? There's some sort of cultural fix that needs to happen, I think, in order to then lay the groundwork for this process of trust building, or not even trust building. You say that trust is overrated, but some kind of world where we're living, a reality where we're living in, where it's
mutual coexistence.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So do you disagree with that?
Of course, I ask this question in different ways on a daily basis. For example, when I see the current polls, and people tend to dismiss polls conducted in Arab environment as I don't share that. I think that as not a specific point in time, but as indicative of trends, they're just as good as any other.
Okay. The counter argument would be that, let's say in Gaza, for example, no one's really telling the truth because they don't know. Everyone might be.
Well, if that was the case, we would not have had moments where majority of Gazans were hostile to Hamas.
Right.
If that were the case.
And that was the case before October 7th, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yes. I usually go to two posters. One is a Palestinian, Khalil Shkaki, and the other one is an American. And both of them specialize in this kind of environment, polling in such an environment.
Okay.
And I compare them and I see where they differ and where they do not. And mostly I'm looking for trends,
Okay.
not for the tiny little changes, but rather where, and you know, when you see how popular Hamas is on the West Bank, okay, and you ask yourself, why wasn't that the case 10 years ago? And the answer is that it's not a cultural thing. The answer is that the moment when there was hope when there was a sense that the Palestinian Authority, through diplomacy, can end the occupation, people rooted for it. And when they gave up on it, they rooted for the only one who is doing something about the occupation and added a layer of denial. Okay? In order to feel comfortable with supporting Hamas, they denied that what happened. They didn't rape, they didn't massacre, they were not as brutal. Okay, we know in psychology this phenomenon of cognitive dissonance. How do you resolve cognitive dissonance? I want to applaud Hamas, so I have to deny that they are butchers and die like terrorists.
Right.
But the bottom line is if I am the grandson of a grandfather who was under occupation, and my father was under occupation, and I see no hope for myself of ever having an identity and expressing myself. You know, it was 2021, I think. I think it was 2021 when Abu Mazen declared elections, and then he canceled them. When he declared them, in the months between declaration and cancellation, there were 36 lists of independent candidates.
Wow.
All of them young. All the lists, it's not independent candidates, independent lists, loaded with young Palestinians who felt finally we will have a voice in determining the future of the Palestinians. And when he canceled it, they were devastated.
Yeah.
But that's, you know, he is now in his 19th year in a 4-year term.
Okay, so you touched on such an important point, right, which is hope. Because and I want to bring this down to the individual level, because I think it's, you know, hope is this sort of abstract concept when you're talking about nations. But if you just bring it down to your own life, it becomes a lot easier to understand. I mean, imagine that you wake up in the morning and day after day after day after day, you think my life and the life of my friends, the life of my kids, the life of my parents, none of that is going to get any better. In fact, it's going to get worse. You have nothing to look forward to. That's terrible. I can't even put myself in that shoe, right? And I have bad days, but I still believe that life is good and can get better. So to rob someone of that is devastating, right? And that partially explains why, for example, you know, you saw ordinary Gazans partake in October 7th, right? I think I've never been to Gaza. I've never spoken to. Sorry, I've spoken to one Gazan in my life, so you know, I don't have such an expertise. But my intuition is such, and I still wonder that if your hope is that you want to reverse the Nakba, if you want to destroy Israel, like as some significant percentage of Palestinian society wants, if your hope is for that, you're going to be severely disappointed over and over and over again. As you said, right? Israel's the far stronger party. If you just want what everyone else wants, which is, you know, a normal, peaceful life where there's no sort of superordinate power that's limiting your potential, your human potential, that's something else, right? And I think that should be wonderful and should be something that everyone should have the opportunity to have. The question I have in my mind is, what exactly does hope mean in the Palestinian context? Is it the former or is it the latter? I know there's, obviously shades of both and everywhere, but
First, let me say something about how you made it personal, which I totally agree with. Ehud Barak once got a lot of flack for saying the following. He said, if I were under occupation, I would join a terrorist organization.
Sure.
Wow. Quite a statement. And I share the sentiment. If I were under occupation, I would join an organization that resists and is considered by the other side as terrorist. I don't think I would ever come close to the viciousness and brutality of Hamas. That's a different category. That's more like Daesh.
But here's the thing.
This is unique in the human annals. I mean, we have wars all over the world, and they don't look the way Hamas and Daesh have performed.
Here's the thing.
Resisting is something else. Now,
I would just
say there will always be the irredentist. Let's assume that tomorrow morning there is a two-state solution. A border was drawn. Palestine is a non-militarized state that entrusts its outside security to Israel, which is what was the point in negotiations. That was the Palestinian position in every round of negotiations. And they are resigned to the fact, not resigned, they accept that two-state solution rules out flooding Israel with refugees. Okay? Now, and this thing happens at 10 years from signature to implementation, and we live happily ever after with whatever friction two societies might have. In both societies, you will have those who will not resign to this outcome. We will have our lunatics who want everything until the Jordan River, and they will have lunatics who want exactly the same, looking at it from the other direction.
Yep.
The real question is, will the majority have a stake in restraining that minority? If they do, we will encounter acts of terrorism from time to time. On both sides, it will happen. There's nobody's promising that it'll be paradise. But if the majority does not have a stake, like today, does not have a stake in restraining the extremists, the violent, then they are empowered. And young generation joins them. And their mobilization appeal gets responded to. So I think that's the translation of hope at the personal and at the national level.
So two things. One is you said that you think you would never sink to the level of brutality that Hamas and ISIS. And I think part of the package when we say that Palestinians are just like any other human being, which again you and I both fundamentally agree, is that I actually can't answer that question in the negative. Like, I don't know if I was 18 years old and raised in Gaza and under that ideology, and I saw that.
That's because you're closer to 18 than I am.
well, you know what I mean. But rewind the clock and imagine, speaking of having no hope, you live your life, and the only chance of respect that you can get is by becoming a member of Hamas, right, in the armed wing, because half the population is unemployed, right? It's
where
in Gaza, right? Yeah. So it's imagine your role models are either unemployed or small merchants or potential terrorists. Those are your options. talk about, living a bleak life, I don't know if I would resist the temptation, right? I mean, who knows, right? So that's number one. And number two, here's something that I wonder, I'd love to know what you think, because I've been thinking about this forever. In such in a region where religion plays such a crucial role, such a central role in people's lives here. Do you think that the peace process was never sufficiently put in religious terms to put it to the Hamas, the Islamist types, the religious settlers, the ultra orthodox, to put it in terms that they can swallow and be at peace with?
Oh, that's an excellent question. And a mea culpa that I will confess to in a minute.
Okay.
But I wanted to start with your previous point.
Okay.
About me going that far or not as a terrorist. And I draw on our own experience, not that I remember from the pre-state era, but my father was there.
Okay.
My late father was one of the founders of the Israeli intelligence, of the Shin Bet.
No kidding.
From before he retired at the equivalent rank of a general.
Wow.
And he was in the Haganah, in the underground. And at that time they called it Shai, Shirut Yedeot, the intelligence service, before the state, and then it became Shin Bet, today's internal security.
Yeah.
And we had basically three major underground movements which did not share the same ideological predisposition. The Haganah was the main one, and then there was the Irgun, Etzel, and the Lehi. And they varied in whom they targeted and the brutality of the targeting. None of them ever crossed those thresholds. Ever. Now, they were not less fierce in their aspiration for statehood.
Right.
And they were fighting on two fronts. There was the British mandate they were fighting, and there was the Arab uprising that they were fighting.
Yeah.
And yet, there were instances that were unacceptable. And we know them. And the names are in the history books. Deir Yassin and others. None of them come close to what Daesh or Hamas were doing. So even when you're desperate for your independence and dignity and self-identity, there are things that are not done by normal human beings. And that's why I feel confident in saying that in Palestinian shoes, I would resist, but not in those terms, ever. But okay, I mean, this is a what-if question that...
The only sort of... in my mind, it's still apples to oranges because, on the one hand, you've got pre-state and a different culture, right? A different ethic, right? Where you've got this sort of communist, socialist, westernized, even in Judea, all that sort of mixed in, and then you've got this highly isolated, highly radicalized population with high unemployment, and so it's a different different control. But anyway,
I yield to that.
And I say, and I congratulate you for being a better human than I potentially am.
In the what if, at least in the what if. Now to your second point.
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that when we look back at the errors of the Oslo era, that is certainly one of them. We did not even look, we erred even in a more comprehensive way. We believed that the dynamics speak for themselves. No need for marketing. Everybody will see. Everybody will see. Well, that was really, really wrong. And one of the errors in that comprehensive mistake is the one that you pointed at. I'll tell you when I had an aha moment on that issue. I was in the Prime Minister's office, and Aryeh Deri, who later became minister of this and that, and eventually went to prison, but he's the leader, unchallenged leader of the Shas party, Sephardi, religious, with a major component of ultra-Orthodox Sephardi religious population. Aryeh Deri was a young politician in the Knesset, whom I thought of as brilliant, smart, totally peace-oriented, totally supportive of what we were doing. And I'm talking about pre-Oslo, when we were cooking something, developing with the Palestinians and others. And one day he and I conspired in my little office next to the Prime Minister, and we conspired to arrange for his spiritual leader, his and Shas, giant spiritual leader, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. We wanted him to issue the equivalent of Psak Halacha, of religious, what do you call it? Psak Halacha, religious ruling, that human life is superior to land.
Oh, wow.
Okay? That Am Yisrael Shalem, a whole of people of Israel, is more important than Eretz Yisrael Shlema, than the totality of Eretz Yisrael.
Okay.
Now, we decided that we're going to orchestrate a moment where he will feel that this will resonate more than just a Saturday Torah lesson. And we arranged for him a visit to President Mubarak of Egypt.
Okay.
And he sat down with President Mubarak. And at the end of their meeting, he went out, and there was huge press curiosity about this phenomena. And he went to the cameras and issued that verdict.
This was Ovadia Yosef, or this was Aryeh Deri?
Ovadia Yosef.
Oh my God.
Aryeh Deri and I conspired and created this thing, and Ovadia Yosef went along.
Oh my gosh.
So that moment when he issued that statement, and suddenly I saw the impact of that statement on his huge constituency. Shas of those days was very supportive of the peace process.
It's amazing.
Even though it meant giving up most of the
biblical heartland.
The cradle of Judaism.
Yeah.
In the West Bank.
Because that's the thing that I question. So the emotional and the cultural significance and connection to places in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, whatever you want to call it, are real. But yeah, this sounds maybe a bit callous, but there are other places in the world, in the Arab world and in Europe, that have also very hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years of Jewish history or Jewish attachment to it, like Morocco, for example, but just anywhere, right? Iraq, Persia, Europe. But no Jewish people are have any sort of violent or aggressive stance towards any of these places, right? They leave. Now again, the places in Hebron, Bethlehem, these kinds of places. Obviously, it's different because it's where it all started. But I do wonder if there's a way to frame that such that sovereignty isn't the issue; it's just access to these places, right? Which it just becomes like a Fez or Marrakesh or Lord knows what else, other kind of places in the world where Jews have had a long connection to, but don't, own it, right?
Look,
I don't know what Jewish teaching says about this, right?
As a secular Jew, I have no problem visiting those places with a visa. Be it Hebron and be it Ma'at HaMachpelah and be it whatever. But what I want to say is there is a reason that the settlement movement's major historical failure is not winning the hearts of the majority of Israelis.
Mm.
Even Israelis who believe that we have a right to these places, but that the future of their children is more important, and therefore that right can be expressed in non-sovereign ways, as you said, via access. We see it for the last 50 years. The settlement movement is not popular among mainstream Israelis. It is very powerful today because its leaders are now in the cabinet. So it's very powerful. But that doesn't turn it into a popular thing. You look at the public opinion polls on the issue of different options between us and the Palestinians. And for years, people present roughly 4 options. Status quo, two-state solution, annexation, or what is called security separation. Okay, no deal, but you are there, we are here, and we control security.
Mm-hmm.
These are the 4 options. And you see fluctuations amongst them, with the exception of one, annexation. It stays constant between 11 and 15% of the public.
Mm.
And when you look at the electoral potency of Smotrich and Ben Gvir combined, it's between 11 and 15% of the public. So you see the correlation between the size of the settlement population in society and its lack of popularity among the overwhelming majority. They just never managed to win the hearts of the Israeli public. Doesn't mean that Israelis are ready tomorrow morning to go through the awful fight for removing settlements that will be outside of Israel's border in a two-state solution. We're not there. We're not ready for it.
Yeah.
But it's not a question on the agenda at the moment. It's over the horizon.
I also, you said that you're a secular Jew, and I don't know what kind of Jew I am, but a Jew I am nevertheless. And the fact that Israel was founded where it was founded, in the place of where this whole Jewish story began. Makes me wonder, though.
Can we pause for a minute?
Yeah, of course. Everything okay?
Everything okay, sort of. I mean, my daughter called to report three things. Her youngest with COVID, her middle with COVID, and the third one called from the army that everything is okay.
Okay, good. And I just had to go to my youngest. He was crying a little bit.
Is
From
okay?
that. Yeah. He's two. And he wakes up in the middle of the night, and his parents are, because this is the third child, so we're not so tough anymore. So he comes into our bed to sleep with us,
You do let him?
Yeah.
Okay, no, that's great.
I would have been a
All
terrorist.
in due course. They know their timing.
I would have been a terrorist, but in this life I'm a softie. So
Yeah. Great.
What I wanted to ask you was, as I was saying, like, is there a way to arrange the fact that you don't have to have sovereignty over these culturally and historically significant places for Jews? But then on the other hand, I think, if I argue against myself for a second here, that Israel is founded in Israel, right? The place very close, the capital is Jerusalem. And it was founded, Zionism just landed on this place for a reason, right? Because the history and all that, like that all came to life here. And it would have been strange if this was like in Texas or something, or New Zealand or any other place in the world, right? So I do have some sympathy for the settlers when they think like, no, this is ours, and we need to be here, and we've had a continuous Jewish presence in other places as well. So it's not something you can just toss aside. But there must be some way that you can marry all those things into one soup, where you allow people to have their emotional connection to these places, that makes their daily lives of rituals and community gatherings, right, in synagogue, and all the prayers and all that history come to life, right? You're actually there in the place where you're reading in the book, and still have some sort of political arrangement baked on top of that, where it's okay. And I don't know what that is, but I guess my question is more of, when you were working on Oslo and drafting all those agreements and giving consideration to the religious aspects of this, that you said that should have been more of a concern for you guys at the time, right?
Not in that regard. In that regard, I'll come to this in a second. When I say that we erred in not taking that in consideration, I meant in not involving religious authorities in educating us on how they see things, in educating them what are the constraints that we see, and trying to find solutions jointly so that they will become advocates of the product. We didn't. We did struggle with the question of, well, let me give you a little bit, open another window.
Yep.
Oslo was 93. In 95, Yossi Beilin, who was the father, really, of Oslo, went to Yitzhak Rabin and tried to convince him that we should use the positive dynamics of the time in order to get it over with and reach a final deal. Not wait for the 5 years, which is now, 27, but rather go for the ultimate deal faster.
Okay.
And Rabin wouldn't hear of it. So just like Oslo, Yossi started, and we were with him, doing what we were not authorized to do. Then we started negotiating a permanent status agreement with Palestinians representing the PLO. This time, everybody was envious of the Norwegians that they had Oslo. So this time, there was a competition from another Nordic country that wanted also its name in history, but it didn't work. And we were negotiating in Finland.
What? I didn't know.
Yeah,
Wow.
an interesting chapter. We were working on a permanent status agreement, or not so much an agreement, but the framework agreement, which is what are the principles of a permanent two-state agreement.
Whoa.
And we accomplished it. We finished, and we had a memo enshrined in history as the Beilin Abu Mazen understandings.
Whoa.
And in that, the Abu Mazen and his team, and of course Yasser Arafat back home, agreed that settlers can stay in the Palestinian state. Wherever the border, those settlements that will not be included in sovereign Israel after we do the swap, the territorial swap, will be able to stay in Palestine as Israeli citizens. They can be, what do you call it, residents of Palestine and citizens of Israel. They vote for the Knesset.
Whoa.
Now, and we were struggling with this issue. And we had brainstormings about it with people from the Jewish branch of the Shin Bet and others. And we asked them, what do you think? And there was unanimity on 2 points. One, those who stay are those who are now, who live in the midst of heavily populated Palestinian areas. These are small outposts because they are not part of the major blocks that are going to become part of sovereign Israel in the deal. But they are outside in hilltop here and hilltop there, few families each. And it will be a nightmare for securing them.
Yeah.
Because no Israeli government can then trust the Palestinian forces to shield Israelis from Palestinians in Palestine.
Right.
Two, you're talking about the most extreme of settlers. Because the more moderate, the more mainstream, go to the bloc.
Yeah.
And who goes to the most outposts? The most extreme of them. And therefore, there would be provocateurs. And the security problem will be compounded. So think again was the message about allowing Israeli communities to remain outside of sovereign Israel, which is relevant to the point that you were making.
Right. Yeah.
Now today, Yossi Beilin is again ahead of the curve, and he's already working for the last 2 years on a project that I'm not involved. I'm just a kibitzer. I'm just from the outside. I give advice on confederation between Palestine and Israel.
Okay.
And the idea of a confederation in his version, which I agree with, which I don't agree with others, is that confederation happens after we have a two-state solution, which means two sovereign states decide to confederate and decide in which areas they confederate and which not. And within that context, he believes, I don't, that Jewish communities can remain in Palestine.
But doesn't that run into the
For
same
the very
problem?
reasons that you raised.
Doesn't that run into the same problem that you...
Yeah, and that's why I don't support it.
Right, okay.
Well, don't support is an understatement.
Right. Well, at least you listen to the security guys. I mean, you're surrounded by them.
Yeah.
So, what do you think happens? I mean, there's no going back to whatever the hell it was in October 7th. I was buying groceries the other day, and I said to the woman at the cashier how she's doing, and she said something like, I wish we could go back to what it was before. And I said, I don't want to go back to that at all, right? Because look what was lurking underneath, right? So, and there's no going back, right? I mean, how can any Israeli countenance anything that Hamas says other than we know what you're up to, and we want no part of that. So, what do you think happens? Where do we go from here?
I don't know where we will go, but I think I know where we might go.
Okay.
And we are at a potentially historic. I mean, usually when it is historic, it's only in retrospect you know that it was historic. But
Yeah.
I believe that history will look at this moment as a historic fork in the road for us. What the decisions that we will make in the next 2 years are going to determine our fate for a generation at least. And we are faced with two completely different options. Option one is that this awful crisis has created an unprecedented opportunity. We have a convergence of interest of a very powerful coalition that is not just willing, but eager to help us stabilize the Palestinian arena, Gaza and the West Bank, because October 7 shook up some of their basic assumptions. Most of them grew tired of the Palestinians and basically accepted that paying lip service to the cause is enough to pacify their own domestic constituency that empathizes with the Palestinians, identifies with them. And two-state solution was a lip service. And this included, I hope people in Washington are not going to resent that too much, this included the Biden administration. Promises made during the campaign were not fulfilled on this issue. And here we are several years later. Nothing was done seriously on this issue. Everybody was talking two-state solution and nobody was doing anything about it. And there was even a moment that I had a fight with friends and colleagues in Washington who wanted the State Department to establish a team to study the one-state option. They were so convinced that the two-state solution is over that they felt that it was that the responsible administration cannot not study the alternative. And I told them, the moment that you establish a team to study it, that's a policy statement. You are announcing that Washington has given up on a two-state solution. And I think it's the wrong message. Besides, I think that you are wrong on the analysis. Because as you know, I'm convinced that a two-state solution is inevitable. Not because we wish it so, And not because we care for Palestinian rights, which I do, but Palestinian rights doesn't make it a historic imperative. Because they have a right, it must happen. No, it may not.
Right.
I think it is inevitable because these two people are going to bleed each other to separation unless they separate by potent leadership on both sides.
Mm.
Israelis will not grant Palestinians equal rights and give up on our Jewish majority and Jewish character. And Palestinians not forever will accept to live without equal rights. So they will fight. And October 7 was just, as awful as it was, it's just a prelude to what is happening here if we continue by the same course of the last 15 years for the next 10. We're going to bleed heavily. We spoke about it earlier, how what Hamas did in Gaza did to mobilization for Hamas on the West Bank.
Yeah. But you started by answering in a more hopeful tone.
I'm coming to that.
Okay.
So all those who spoke about the two-state solution is dead but not yet buried, on October 7th, 8th, the two-state solution was transformed from lip service to policy directive. Suddenly everybody is working on how do we get there. We know it's not going to happen tomorrow. But we have to do some reverse engineering from the end game to how do we conduct ourselves today so that one day we will get there. So suddenly what you hear is the following. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, Egypt, Jordan, Qatar, never mind, the Europeans, are all in line with Washington's approach, which Tom Friedman gave expression to a few days ago in the New York Times, called it the emerging Biden doctrine. And quite humbly, I would say that I preceded him by 2 months. I published it in Time magazine 2 months ago. Which says basically that we're talking about a two-layer strategy. Layer one is stabilizing the Israeli-Palestinian arena, and layer two is building on it a regional structure to contain Iran and its proxies and their meddling in the region. Now, for the regionals to integrate Israel into it, they demand a stabilized West Bank and Gaza. For them to contribute to the stabilization of Gaza, financially and otherwise, in the morning after, they have two conditions. One condition is that Gaza rehabilitation and governance is done under the auspices of Palestinian Authority.
Okay.
Now, they're not naive. And they know that the Palestinian Authority today is totally incapable of running Gaza. But they want the Palestinian Authority to be the legitimizer.
Why are they incapable of
running They cannot control Jenin. So you expect them to go over and run 2 million people, 2.2 million people, with all the devastated damage. You need a very powerful entity with very deep pockets and a different kind of legitimacy in order for Gazans to cooperate with it.
Right.
So what they're saying is, we need to contribute the financial funding required, the management that is required. We're even willing to contribute troops, boots on the ground for security, provided it's all done under the auspices of the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority invites the outsiders. Money for rehabilitation goes through the Palestinian Authority. 2 brigades of the Palestinian Authority join the troops on the ground that the region contributes, and so on and so forth. So we're talking about a process of Gaza rehabilitation with a concurrent process of Palestinian Authority revitalization, reform, rebuilding, until the symbolic role of the PA in Gaza gradually becomes substantive, not just symbolic. And eventually, the 2 parts of the Palestinian territories become connected. So one condition that they made, and still do, to this very day, literally today, reiterated by the Saudis, is that it's all done under the auspices of the Palestinian Authority. The second condition is that it is done in the context, and now I'm literally quoting because everybody is using the same mantra, in the context of a credible, irreversible commitment to a path leading to a 2-state solution.
So
a credible commitment to a path, which means not now, leading to a 2-state solution, irreversible. So if Israel were able and willing to accept the 2 conditions, we're going to have the international community with a heavy accent on regional players coming in and helping us extricate ourselves out of Gaza, stabilize and reform the Palestinian Authority. And what is required of us is to change our attitude vis-a-vis the Palestinian Authority and the West Bank.
So,
hold it, I just want to finish this thought.
Please do.
If that were to happen, we have a stable situation here. Saudi Arabia normalizes relations with us. And the normalization with Saudi Arabia has 2 advantages in 2024. One is the normalization. It's a very valuable thing. Saudi Arabia, the main player in the Arab world, economic importance and otherwise. 2, it helps Israeli politicians market the concessions they make for the Palestinian Authority to the Israeli public. Look at the reward that we're getting for doing what we should have done anyway on the Palestinian side. Now, were that to happen, the entire American strategy of a regional architecture to set Iran, integrates Israel into it. Both sides want that. The alternative? Enjoy Gaza. You like Gaza? Have fun. Get stuck in Gaza like you did in Lebanon for 18 years.
Yeah.
Until a courageous prime minister named Ehud Barak got you out of there. After 18 useless years of bleeding for no good reason. And it's not just Gaza, because the fork in the road, if we take the direction of saying no to the Biden initiative and to the regionals, we're not just going to be in Gaza for an indefinite period, bleeding and funding, because the international community is not going to fund an Israeli occupation. They will fund when Israel goes out. We will have to fund it. But it's not going to be just Gaza. Because under such circumstances, the West Bank will slide in a Gaza-like direction. Because there's no hope. And I remember well your point about hope on the personal and national level.
Yeah.
So we're going to have that. And if the 2 areas are bubbling, will the Abraham Accord signatories be able to sustain street pressure that is already there to cut relations? will Egypt and Jordan be able to sustain public pressure to cut relations? So the fork in the road is dramatic. You go one way and you have a completely different potential future. I want to be careful. Maybe it will fail.
Yeah.
Maybe things will go wrong. But you know that if we take the other one, you're guaranteed for an awful future.
It's you raise a I love the way you framed it, because it's easy to lose sight of the claim that Hamas is really a Iranian puppet, and Iran sensing Israel and Saudi Arabia and sort of the noose actually tightening around their neck in the region, give support to October 7th, and with the gamble that this will, as you say, lead to Israel making strategic mistakes where it blows up everything, right? Not just Saudi Arabia and Israel, but the entire Abraham Accords, Egypt, Jordan. So there's the extreme end of that scenario, and then on the other hand, it completely backfires against Iran and Hamas and Hezbollah and all these lovely folks that
the Houthis in Yemen.
Correct, right. All the so yeah, it's and there's no sort of third option in the middle somewhere here. But I mean, because as you say,
I don't see it.
Right,
I don't
because
see
you're
it.
saying all the forces in the region and in Washington are pushing in one clear direction, which is...
I asked somebody just yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
I asked somebody, what is Plan B? Which is what you are asking. Okay. Mm-hmm. If the Biden approach is not working, what is Plan B? And the answer was Plan B is to work harder on Plan A.
Yeah. It's so why would Israel not work? I guess the only objection there would be if Israel doesn't have security control over Gaza, what Hamas type force would take its place? I mean, how could they trust the PA to keep a lid on things if, as you said, they can barely control Jenin and Hamas and what they do in there, right?
There's no trust.
Mm-hmm.
Gaza has to be demilitarized, and for a significant period of time, we should also oversee the demilitarization. For a significant period of time, we should control the outer envelope of the smuggling, of weapons smuggling. By now, everybody knows the name, Philadelphia route, mm-hmm. Which separates Gaza from Egypt. Mm-hmm. Less than 10 miles long, 14 kilometers. And assuming Israel was in the mood to plan the morning after, and we know that the prime minister prevents that from happening. He does not allow the cabinet to discuss the morning after, because he knows that there are three options for Gaza: Israeli prolonged occupation, Israeli unilateral withdrawal, which leaves a vacuum that sucks into it all the crazy terrorists from all over the region, mm-hmm. all Al-Qaeda derivatives and Daesh, ISIS derivatives and other Salafis and Hamas come back and whatever. Or third party takes over. Third party conditions it on PA. Third party conditions it on a prospect for a peace process in the future. The first one, the Israeli public doesn't want to prolong the occupation. The second one, nobody wants. And the third one, the lunatic members of his coalition don't want. Mm-hmm. So he's not bringing it up for discussion because he knows that the security establishment for sure would make this analysis. And we say, okay, you are the boss, you choose.
Yeah.
And that's the end of his coalition. So the reason that we're not discussing it is because of political considerations, not national security interests. So we're stuck. I keep saying to my American colleagues that Gaza is stuck in Jerusalem.
All roads lead back there, don't they?
And the administration in Washington, and not just the administration in Washington, some usual suspects over here too, have been working on detailed plans of that transition period that, as you said, we cannot trust anybody. And how do we secure it? And how do we square the circle that the third parties will not want to look as operating on behalf of Israel, which means that they are the occupiers. They want to look as those who enabled Israel, if not forced Israel, to get out of Gaza in the service of Palestinian aspirations.
Hope.
Which will give it legitimacy and hope, and therefore public popular support that restrains the crazy, the extremists, that instead of joining the extremists, they whisper to the authorities, these guys are planning something, you better go there.
Hope. That's it. They've got to be messengers and ambassadors of hope. I don't see
hope is far more important than trust. Yeah.
Nimrod.
Because hope is theirs, their own. They own it.
Yeah. It's
trust is in someone else.
This is just again on a basic human psychology that you want to feel like your life has meaning and purpose, and it's not for nothing. You get one shot at life, and you want it to be as good as it can possibly be, and not just for you, but for your kids and for your family. And who wouldn't want to live like that, right? That's what makes life great.
There was a moment. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead. Tell me.
There was a moment where the Egyptians, years before October 7th, reached the conclusion that the going strategy was failed and will lead to a major bloodbath. And they developed an alternative strategy, which is what everybody is talking about now. And they started to prepare for it. And they came to Bibi and they presented it and they asked for a green light and so on. It's an interesting anecdote in history. But one thing that they did, and to me was astonishing because it was run by the Egyptian intelligence. In Egypt, the Egyptian intelligence holds the Israel file, Israel and Palestine, not the foreign ministry. So the Egyptian intelligence was preparing this strategy. And one of the things that they did that astonished me was for 2 years, they brought to Egypt, to a resort, groups of about 80 to 100 young Gazans, group after group after group, each one being 80 to 100 people, for retraining in Islam.
Okay.
They would bring them to a resort and bring them religious authorities to discuss with them a different interpretation of the Quran. This is what Hamas taught you in the mosque, and we will show you a different face of Islam.
Whoa.
Pro-peace, pro-moderation, pro-coexistence, and so on. And they had an implied message, which was basically, look around. These Gazans never left Gaza. They never knew a different kind of life. And they brought him to a nice resort and say it's a matter of choice. If you make a certain choice in accordance with this interpretation of the Quran, Gaza can look like this resort.
That's amazing.
And they prepared 1,200 young people to serve as the political base for the leader who will lead Hamas away from violence to becoming a political party.
Wow.
It's an anecdote. You know, the difference between an anecdote and a footnote to history and a turning point in history is a decision of a leader.
Right.
When he embraces it, it becomes a turning point. When he rejects it, it becomes a footnote.
Right.
People rejected it, so it became a footnote. But nonetheless, I don't think they described to him this, because I don't think at that level of leadership you discuss layers like that, because there were more important layers that they prepared for that strategy, including bringing the Saudis and the Emiratis to replace the Qataris in funding Gaza, so it's not going to go to Hamas, but rather to others, and so on. There was a lot of preparations made before they came to present it in Jerusalem and to ask for a green light. But I thought that anecdote links both to what you said about religious here, and to the fact that even an intelligence service can sometimes be intelligent.
Listen, I think we're gonna have to end on that note because I've got a child who's.
I hear that you're being called. You're being summoned.
That's right. The boss is talking. Nimrod, thanks so much for doing this, man. This was great.
It's a pleasure. Enjoy talking to you.
Likewise, man. Be well.
Take care.